This week's Inspired By comes from the Vale of Glamorgan on a beautiful sunny day, which is probably about as far apart as today's subject, Maria Leijerstam, can picture. Polar explorer, businesswoman, entrepreneur, rocket scientist, I even believe. It's a real honour to come and see somebody who not only the first person to cycle to the South Pole, a whole host of other interesting things, Guinness World Record holder, and as a businesswoman. I really wanted to come and see Maria because it's very unusual in life to find people who run successful businesses, who've come out of a corporate career, but have also gone off and done what, frankly, most people would consider to be stupid, impossible, beyond them, take your pick. So Maria, thank you ever so much for joining me today.
Thank you for coming to visit.
The first question, I guess, is somebody meets you at a party, having never met you before, having not heard about you. Do as all the English ask each other, or all the British ask each other, oh, hi Maria, what do you do? How on earth do you answer a question like that?
Well, it usually starts with a long pause as I try and work out what it is exactly that I do. But I think you've summed it up quite well there. I'm certainly an adventurer, from anything from running across the Sahara Desert to cycling to the South Pole, like you mentioned. And I'm also a business owner. I set up my business in 2010 after I'd had 10 years of corporate experience and decided that, you know, when I get out of bed in the morning, I want to jump out of bed with a huge smile on my face and just really look forward to the day. And even though the corporate world was great and I learned a lot and it was challenging, I really enjoyed it. It just wasn't quite enough for me, and I just wanted to, you know, do something that was truly mine, something that I had created. So setting up my business was the thing, you know, it was my calling. It's something I always wanted to do. Absolutely.
And I noticed on your, understandably on your social media profiles and so on, the first thing that jumps out is Polar Explorer, the white ice cycle, for reasons I completely understand. Would you say though is that what comes first when somebody asks about you and who you are and what you do? Is that, do you still think, oh, that is my, not crowning glory, that's the wrong word, but the thing perhaps you're most proud of?
Yeah, I think so. Although it's interesting because, you know, with the media, they like to pick up on all the drama. And just recently I've been in my local town of Cowbridge and people have come up and said, are you the lady who broke her knee? As opposed to, are you the lady who cycled to the South Pole? So, you know, it's interesting how media works and what people's perception, you know, is and what they pick out from the media. But yeah, I think I'm definitely most known for, and my biggest achievement's got to be cycling to the South Pole. It was a huge undertaking. It wasn't just the cycling to the South Pole. The 4 years which it took me to plan, organise, you know, everything from permits to logistics to the training to going into the completely unknown. People had attempted to cycle in Antarctica before and pretty much everybody had failed to do so successfully. So, you know, I was going into something that had almost been proved impossible. Which is why I just jumped on the chance. I loved the idea of that and I thought I've got to go and give it a go. So yeah, I think the South Pole is my biggest achievement.
You are your ambassador for the Welsh Year of Adventure,
Yes.
2016. When you were growing up, when you were a small child, was there an indication that you were going to have this amazing life doing all these crazy things? What was your sort of background and what was it like growing up for you?
I grew up on a farm. I've got a very close family. I've got amazing parents that have always supported me in everything that I've done. Yeah, I grew up, my best friends were our goats and dogs and ponies, and you know, that was my world. Just come home from school, put on my joggers, go and play, roll in the manure heap, all those sorts of things. But my first sort of, I suppose, aspiration in terms of job was, I remember when I was about 11 years old and I said to my mother, I want to become an astronaut. So I think that was really the start of, you know, this was a little bit different to a normal 11-year-old. And, you know, again, I think what's driven me is when people have said, you can't do that, or you're not good enough, or, you know, you'll struggle to do that. I will go out of my way to prove, not just to them, but to myself, I can actually do it. So, yeah, I think it started fairly young.
You've run the Marathon des Sables. If running is the right description, probably suffering is more likely. You've done so many amazing things. There are people for whom adventure can't, for a variety of reasons, be perhaps that big. Who, because of time restraints, perhaps because of physical limitations, time and so on. Is there a danger though that adventure, the word adventure sums up going to the South Pole, climbing Everest, sailing around the world? What does it mean to you? What do you think adventure is?
Yeah, I think, there's definitely a common understanding around the world that adventure is something that's extreme. However, that word extreme is very different for some people. So for me, extreme is cycling to the South Pole or cycling across Siberia. For somebody else, extreme might be achieving a 5-kilometre run. So it's people's perceptions. It's all about perception. So, to make the media and to, become well known, you have to do really super extreme things. They have to be, life-defying and they have to be in extreme places around the world. But for the majority, 99.999% of people, I think, they could have fairly extreme on their doorstep, or adventure certainly on their doorstep. And that's exactly why I set up my business. I came back from having done raced on the World Adventure Racing Circuit, obviously having cycled across Siberia, run the Marathon des Sables, done a lot of adventures like that, and thought, well, it's this buzz that I get from doing these adventures that I want other people to feel, yet without having to go to the extreme places that I go to. And that's why I set up my business. And there's nothing better than seeing a family running over one of my finish lines, huge smiles on their faces, having achieved one of the biggest things as a family they've ever done. It just brings me all the joy I could ever want. So, yeah.
Well, I've seen on Twitter feeds, I've seen people posting them finishing and doing things that frankly they probably thought they would never do, be it kayaking, be it going running with their children. And you said, when I heard you speak at the Wilderness Lectures in December, you said something which really stuck out. You said, how can I combine a business I love with adventure? And I was going to ask you, so you set up the Burn series, and you said during your talk you realised there was a gap in the market for parents who wanted to encourage their children in a safe environment, but at the same time that perhaps gave them some exposure to the concept of risk, the concept of doing some training so they can finish something with all the pride that entails. And you mentioned actually that it's the family element that has taken over and has become the largest part of the business. Is that?
Absolutely. I had no intention really to make it family specific, but it was something that just grew organically. And we are the only adventure racing company in the UK that offer an adventure race format for families to take part in together. There's a lot of races now where they have, the adult category and the child category. And I still think, we underestimate our children quite a lot. We ask them to run 200 metres when we go and do a 10K, or 500 metres or 1 kilometre, but they are capable of so much. And the mini burn, there's so many elements to it. It's not just sport. And there's also the team dynamics. There's some strategy involved because there's orienteering. There's, time limits, so they need to decide which checkpoints they're going to try and get. And there's so many different things happening during that race.
What made you choose the type of adventures, A, that you go on yourself, and B, that you run as a business? Because you've had a very interesting, in your talk, you mentioned Marathon des Sables, sounded as if that was your first huge challenge. Then you went off and did a 50-mile adventure race. You cycled New Zealand, and then to get the relevant experience for winter cycling, or some of the relevant experience, you went off to Lake Baikal in Siberia.
Yep.
These are all monumentally challenging undertakings for anybody. What is it that drives you? Why do you choose this part of adventure and not mountaineering or sailing around the world, or one of the other 101 things you could do?
I mean, I've done mountaineering. I've climbed. I've climbed Mont Blanc, so it's not a huge mountain, but it's still mountaineering. I've done the Three Peaks yacht race twice. That's sailing the lengths of Britain and running up Snowdon, Scafell Pike, and Ben Nevis. I like to experience a lot of things. Hence the whole multi-sport nature of my business. I think I would get bored if I just cycled or just ran or just mountaineered. So I like to try and do a little bit of everything, and that's why really I set up my business. And I suppose the fundamentals of it comes from adventure racing, which after running the Marathon des Sables, I took part in a Thames Path Ultra 50-mile race, where I met somebody who told me about adventure racing, which was multi-sport, multi-day, in teams of 4. There's always 3 guys and 1 girl. They have to be mixed teams, and because there's not that many women that compete in adventure racing. It tends to be that format. And you know, you cross countries, it can be up to 900, 1,000 kilometres in distance, and they're non-stop, so you race all day and all night. I took part in the World Championships in Portugal. I raced across Ireland. I've taken part in quite a lot of those sorts of races, and I just love the dynamics involved with the team. When sleep deprivation comes into play as well, it's a whole new ball game and actually becomes quite comical at some points. But then just the different sports and the fact that we would never really know where we're going because it's all self-navigated, and we'll get to a checkpoint and there might be, you know, a cliff we have to climb up or abseil down, or, you know, all of a sudden we're provided with a kayak or a boat or something to paddle across a river. And so there's so many surprises and unknowns, and that for me is real adventure. That's where adventure comes into play, definitely. Not knowing.
And you studied maths at university. Is part of it the element of organising, looking at the science of things? Certainly for your South Pole thing, you had to get a bike designed.
Yep.
One didn't exist. You had to think about the appropriate metals to use.
Yep.
You had to go and do the testing. Is part of it the science as well?
Absolutely. I think, you know, with expeditions these days, it's not enough just to go and do a successful expedition. And unless you're going to have a huge tragedy, which I definitely do not want to have, particularly since I now have a little girl as well, you know, my measurements of risk have changed somewhat. You know, I like to do I call smart expeditions. They're ones that, you know, I've really had to think through to solve some problems in order to be able to do. So with the South Pole, two-wheel bike had proved not possible. So I thought, you know, what can we do? And how can I take into account the fact there's going to be a strong headwind the whole time? And when I say strong, sort of 100-mile-an-hour headwind constantly, and the deep snow, and, you know, all of the freezing of metals and components and parts and things, you know, all of that had to come into play to create something, you know, that would be successful. And I'm pleased to say I had absolutely no problems with the Polar Cycle. It was absolutely the piece of kit for the job. So, you know, that was great. And yeah, sometimes I like to just go and have an adventure, and then I will sign up, I'll pay my money and go and do, you know, whether it's climb a mountain or go and, you know, take part in a race, I'll do that. But the ones I love are the ones that I have created, I have thought up, I've dreamt up, I've planned, you know, I've executed. And then also I love the whole experimenting with my body, basically, to see what it can do. That really excites me. And even though I've studied some sport nutrition, because I retrained myself as a personal trainer and did some sports nutrition qualifications as well, you know, I still find it quite difficult to say there is an exact science when it comes to sport nutrition and the body itself. And I think the only way you can do it is by experimenting with yourself, and that's what I do all the time. When I'm going to do a race or even going to do some training, I'm testing with different foods and different liquids and, you know, different timings and things like that. And I find that really, really interesting. And I'm writing my book at the moment. I've got a big long chapter on all the you know, the nutritional side of it, which is I find quite exciting. So
definitely. Well, when I talked to Richard Davies a couple of weeks ago, who is an ultra runner.
Yeah.
And has done Marathon des Sables and so on, and he lives for this. And I got the impression he almost enjoyed the experimenting with how far he could push his body and the effect of changing diet to see, well, if I'm going to live a week like this, what then happens to my times when he goes off to Chamonix. I got the impression that actually all the prior preparation, in a way, gives him more satisfaction and enjoyment than perhaps the event itself. Is that?
Yeah, I think because a lot of them, certainly South Pole, had such a long build-up to it, to then go and complete it in 10 days was almost a little bit of a letdown, because, you know, I'd spent 4 years of my life I dedicated to it. So to have it all done and dusted, and, you know, once I was there, all I had to do was keep my pedals turning. That's all I had to do. I just had to keep cycling. Obviously I needed to cook and look after myself and everything, but, you know, the brain almost didn't have to work anymore. It was just simply the physical side of got to just keep going. So yeah, it is definitely as much in the planning as it is the actual execution.
And Ben Saunders, who I'm sure you've heard of, very well-known polar explorer, madman, and he described pole exploration as crack cocaine of adventure, because he said it gives you such a high. Yeah. It's almost impossible to think of something that could replicate that feeling of achievement and success. And when I watched your video, what was lovely is how much the raw emotion came through in an era where we have lots of television adventurers where you know full well that there's a full backup team right behind them if anything goes wrong. You left us in no doubt that this was your thing, and anything could go wrong, and you were responsible for sorting it out.
Yeah.
And the emotions came through. How on earth can you do something now that compares to that? Do you regard that as a one-off, or is this a case of that was so awesome, now I have to think of something else that is of equal craziness?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always on Google just having a quick look at what I could potentially do next, and I've always got plans in the pipeline. I think I've managed to time things really well. I'm 37 now, so I'm quite a bit older than most, but I had a baby girl last year, and for me that is something that is just, I can't replicate that anywhere else. It's the most incredible thing, and spending days with her is just going to the park and swinging her really high for her to get that bit of excitement that she's, you know, she's only little and I'm pushing her really high and she loves it, and you know, things like that. And I think actually you don't have to replicate and go and get things as extreme to have that same feeling. Sometimes it's just, you know, experiencing something new, and for me motherhood is a completely new thing, and you know, I feel really quite satisfied that I have achieved so much in my life and done so much. I am ready now to go and spend day after day in the play park pushing my daughter on the swing. But, you know, I do have some things in the pipeline this year, and I am always, you know, I think adventure is just in me, and continuing to run my business is really exciting. It's the year of adventure in Wales this year, and so I'm on a bit of a coast-to-coast challenge. I'm going to cycle the coast of Scotland, England and Wales all in one go later in the year, so I'm really looking forward to that as well, and signing up to some local races as well.
Fantastic. And sometimes it's a understandably it can be a bit of a delicate subject, that of family and ladies in sport and adventure and life in general. And some ladies I've spoken to have young children have explained how actually adventure doesn't have to end. It might be because, and one lady in particular came out with something really quite interesting. She said, well, whereas before I used to be in the mountains and I used to look at the summit and think, how am I going to get to the top of the summit? She said, now I have young children, I'm more interested in how can we travel through these mountains and still experience them and pass on that enthusiasm, respect to my children. How do you say you've had a daughter fairly recently? And as we all get older, our bodies perhaps aren't capable of what they were 5-10 years ago. Are you finding you adapt the types of challenges you take on to reflect life events?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not running as much now because I'm looking after my daughter full time at the moment. I work at night when she's asleep. But so I do an awful lot of walking now, and I've got a backpack, and she comes in the backpack with me. I was in the Dolomites last weekend, and we were up through the mountains. She loves sitting in the backpack. She can look out, and then when she gets tired, she can have a sleep. So, you know, she'll spend 2-3 hours at a time in that backpack. So I hike every day with her for probably about 2 hours.
Wow.
And actually, I'm probably stronger now than I have been before because she weighs quite a lot. So, you know, being out walking with her is quite a challenging itself. And actually the polar cycle when she was smaller and she used to sit on my front was perfect. I was out for hours on end on the polar cycle training, so you know it's brilliant. I haven't had to really stop any of my outdoor activity side of things, just slightly adapt it. So no, and it's actually more fun now because I've got her with me.
Sure.
So.
Yes. And one of the many reasons I was really looking forward to coming to see you is not only do you have this amazing adventurous life, you're also a businesswoman. You've come from a corporate background, working with some very well-known companies, to set up your own business, the Burn series. When it comes to priorities, supposing hypothetically you are invited to join a team to go and do a world first, but it coincided with a period where your business really needed your help over a 3-month period. What comes first?
This is one of those questions you said you'd throw in. I mean, it would obviously have to depend on what that adventure was. I do quite like to think up my own adventures. I'm I'm not saying I wouldn't join a team to do an adventure, because I'd quite like that, but you know, my business is my baby. It's just, it's something that if my business really needed me, because otherwise it would go down or something would go wrong, then I think I'd probably have to commit to that business, because I am kind of at the stage now where I want to make sure that I am providing opportunities for others to have that same excitement and that feel, you know, that I've had in the past. And, you know, that's what I'm doing through my business. So I would try and do both. Can I answer like that?
Yeah,
Is that allowed?
of course. You wouldn't be the first person to tell me that. Fantastic. And again, it's a slightly delicate subject, but I'm going to be cheeky and ask it anyway. Cycling to the South Pole doesn't come cheap.
No.
And if I understand it correctly, you had a degree of sponsorship, but nothing like some expeditions where
No.
it's plastered all over the media and you know that there's one company providing a lot of money
Yeah.
behind it. How did you finance it?
So I had savings from corporate world, and then I had to take loans from my parents and other family members, which I am still paying back today. Hence trying to do lots of talks, corporate talks preferably,
Yes.
which I think most adventurers tend to, and expeditioners tend to do. So yeah, it was something I was so passionate about, so positive I could do it, that I just, you know, I thought I'll be able to pay it back. So it's happening slowly, but it's going to take another 20 years.
Yeah. And is there a reason why you took that approach rather than trying to get a bank or an insurance company or a big corporate?
I spent 2 years trying to get sponsors. I was on the phone. I probably rang about 10 companies a day for 2 years. But because I was an unknown, people didn't know of me. I was female, I think also potentially doesn't help, because, you know, adventuring generally is a male's world. It was trying to do something that had been proven pretty much impossible. You know, there were so many things against me. You know, again, I've written in my book about some of the sort of responses that I had, but it was quite funny. You know, the fact budgets have already been tied up, and you know, we wish you all the best of luck, and you know, a lot of things like that. But you know, the good thing was that through all of these phone calls, I did manage to get all of my kit. I managed to get some of my training costs, some, you know, lots of things like that. The polar cycle itself as well. So I did manage to get something out of the calls, but it wasn't the hard cash I needed for all of the logistics and the flights and things. So,
do you think there's an argument to say if you're taking loans from people who are close to you, be it family, friends, and so on, did that at all provide extra motivation, you think?
It provided a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no way I could fail. I just could not fail. There was no way I could fail. I mean, even if you have a sponsor on board, you feel, you know, you can't fail till you've got that sponsor on board, but at least it's not, you know, your money you're playing with, whereas this was essentially my, you know, my family money that I was playing with, and it, you know, I couldn't fail. There was no way. Even if both my legs had fallen off, I would have found some way of cycling to the South Pole. Yeah. That is how determined I was.
Cool. You have a great website, whiteicycle.com, where for just £5 you can go in and download the film, which I highly recommend to people. You have a book coming out.
End of the year, hopefully.
Yeah, book's coming out at the end of the year.
At the moment,
So final question for sort of part one. When somebody buys your book, as I will, and they ask you to put a single message, single piece of advice, or something you wish somebody had said to you, or perhaps it's something somebody did say to you years ago that sparked the dream, what would that single...
I tend to write follow your dreams, because it's something that I did when I left my corporate world. I woke up one day and I thought, I've got a dream, and at the moment I'm not following it. I've got to follow that dream, and you know, don't think too much about it, just go and do it. So follow your dreams.
Fantastic. And does it have a title yet? Not yet.
Okay. No, I'm arguing with my mother over the title at the moment. She wants it to be Long Legs to the Pole, but I don't like that name.
Fantastic. Well, we'll stand by to see who wins that argument. So, thank you very much, Maria.
Thank you.